along the way, I found myself struggling with, what does this mean? What is it about? And during the course of running tour guides for the last couple of years, I found that many people also have very different impressions about what this is. So I'd like to go through this in the way that I've kind of simplified it for myself and point it down the road of where my research goes with regards to it. So in many ancient cultures, including Greece, sacred geometry was used as a tool to discover the ultimate mystery of human conscious awareness. How was it done? It was done by, this microphone's a little weird, I'm sorry if I keep booming. The 7 liberal arts, this was studied in ancient Greece, consisted of something called the quadrivium and something called the trivium. Quadrivium was number, geometry, which is number in space, music, number in time, and astronomy, which is number, space and time. The trivium went into areas of grammar, rhetoric and logic and how you conduct yourself as a human being in human affairs and so on, following on from these kinds of precepts. So, one of the ways that it could have been discovered was that people discovered that numbers, when you leave them to their own kind of devices or you let them organize themselves in funny kinds of ways, as almost like they've got their own pattern-making mechanism within them. For example, 9 ones into a calculator multiplied by 9 ones is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why is that? Why does the Chinese magic square work the way it does? So, modern cosmology tries to explain the origins of the universe, and we work from a precept that there is chaos to cosmos. But what is chaos? What is cosmos? Cosmos comes from the original word cosmeo, which means embroidery, weave together. So the original word actually gives the implication that there is a weaving together of things. There is something of a structure there. Chaos can give us the impression in modern day linguistical terms that we are dealing with something that's haphazard and wild. In many ancient cultures, in China and Egypt, they called it the void, the yawning gap. It was this place from which material reality comes into existence. So if you look at a blank sheet of paper, and you consider this to be a metaphor for the creation of the universe, or even the creation of an idea, and this is something I'll be coming on to, then this is our beginning. We can start with nothingness, no-thingness. What is this? And we can build upon that then, metaphorically, by putting an infinitesimal point on that nothingness. It has no dimension, no space, no width, no depth, no breadth. But it's a beginning, and from that beginning, a line can emerge, where you have 2 points and 1 dimension, a width. We're beginning to construct space through geometry, number and space. So from our line, which becomes a radius, we can draw a circle. Once we've got a circle, we have unity. We have something that has an inside and an outside, 2 dimensions. And so, if you have unity then, if you have something that is contained within itself, the problem comes down to, how do you divide that unity into infinity? How do you divide something that is 1 into infinite? So the sacred geometry has come up with this Vesica piscis that you see on the end, and that was considered to be unity reflecting upon itself. God wanting to know himself, the universe having a mirror to looking. And we know that it's from that Vesica piscis that's created in the middle, sorry, I'll just go back. The Vesica piscis that's created in the middle, from that we can get the regular forms, triangles, squares, pentagons, all the forms we find throughout nature, plants and regular forms and so on. And the crop circles started in this way, in their evolution. 1 was the number when they started. We had that for a couple of years. And then 2 and 3, 4, 5. Many people called the 5s quintuplets for a number of years. It became stuck in our minds. Celtic cross, quintuplet, on it went. Pictograms and so on. So this Vesica piscis then was considered by the Greeks and many other cultures to be a metaphor for God reflecting upon himself and the universe being created therefrom. So we had Vesica piscis reflected in crop circles. So I'm showing you these to correspond the fact that these are things that we've definitely been pointed our attention to. The triangle comes from the birth of the triangle comes from the Vesica. So, geometry and music. Now we're talking about number and time. When I spoke last year, I talked about a story with Pythagoras that he went past the blacksmiths with, and he heard the anvil hitting against, the hammers hitting against the anvil, and he heard two different tones. One was kind of a C note, R, and the next one was a C note, but a pitch higher. So he asked the blacksmith why he was hearing that. Blacksmith informed him that he had two hammers, one 6-pound, one 12-pound. Pythagoras immediately recognized there was a 2-to-1 ratio in what he was perceiving as an octave, as perceiving as two different sounds that were the same, but one was a pitch higher. So he went back to his laboratory. I think this is a picture of him in his lab. And he filled up some bottles and bells of different shapes and measured strings and worked out different ratios. And from that, musical harmony came. He realized that music was number and time. And so across the Vesica, if that middle line was seen to be a string, it's one whole string. You pluck it, you get a C note. You put your finger in the middle, you have two halves to the one. You pluck it, you get a C note that's an octave higher. Now we perceive that. That's something that bypasses the intellect. It's not something we get taught. We just know. So this is something within consciousness that's telling us that number is a key to how we're recognizing harmony specifically. You put your finger on the string at the side of the one of the circles and you get a musical fifth. You can build on this geometry as they did. Put a Vesica at the side there and you put your finger on the string there and you get a fourth. So there's your C, G and F. And you build on it further and you get church windows. One circle that's at the bottom here on the right is twice the size of the other one, so you're visually seeing an octave. It looks wonderful, it looks harmonious because we're wired to see it that way. This is why the German philosopher Goethe said architecture or geometry is frozen music. So we see these ratios played out in crop circles, many, many of them. They're talking to us about ratios, there's no doubt about it. It doesn't matter what the measurement is, a ratio is a ratio. So let me ram this home. It means that we are wired. When we have a circle that's in front of us that's 10 feet wide and we have another one that's 5, so you've got 2 to 1, it looks harmonious to us in a pattern visually through our eyes, the same as we hear a piece of string that's got a measurement, you know, with your finger on it at those kinds of different measurements, and we hear it perfectly. You don't have to learn it. If someone throws a bum note into a piece of music, you know it's there, mostly. And so this tells us something, that consciousness is wired visually and audibly to this number recognition pattern. Pi. This is another thing that's come up with regards to the crop circles. Obviously, circles involve pi. It's another thing I've kind of looked at and tried to think, okay, well, I was told at school 22/7, 3.14. And it's funny, when you mention this to people, when you say to people, pi, you see that blank look come, you know, oh, no, I'm no good with numbers. I was never very good with numbers. It's a genetic thing, you know. So I want to try and just give you my simple take on it, if I can. It doesn't matter what the unit of measurement is, if it's a foot high or a yard a zog. A 1 is a 1. And if we call that diameter 1, and then we measure the circumference in relation to it, the relationship is the important point. The relationship will never be rational. One will be rational, and the other one, in this case actually, will be transcendental, not irrational, because it goes on and on and on. And conversely, if you call the outside one, you lay out a piece of string and you measure it and it's 1 foot and you turn it into a circle and then put a diameter in, then the diameter is going to be the transcendental part. You can never get one or the other. It won't ration out. So you're talking about a circle as a unity object that contains within it the transcendental and the rational. There we go. A circle's diameter and circumference and area represent the limited and the unlimited, the rational and the transcendent in one body. You all know this by now, I'm sure. Pi formation last year, clearly. And the ellipsis at the end, when I got into that the first morning, the big circle that you see, the first circle on the outside, at the end, that was the only circle that you could enter. The other two circles, there was no path into them. So we were being asked to look upon infinity, or look upon, take a journey from the center, walk out pi. So this is very important to the circle makers. And for those of you that don't know, this is how it played out. So any of you that don't know how it works out as pi? I think you do. That's how it played out. So the other thing is the squaring of the circle. What does this mean? When Michael Glickman discovered that this squared the circle to the thickness of a pencil line in 2002, and then Alan Brown looked back over all the other things we'd called quintuplets over the 25-year period and discovered that they'd all been squaring the circle. So we'd been looking at something for 25 years. The problem had been solved in a more simple way than it had ever been attempted to be solved by anybody else on the planet. And we didn't even notice. It took 25 years to discover it. So there was something in the syllabus that was being pointed out and still is pointed out to today. We still get quintuplets. So this is very important. That's how it squared the circle. These are the early quintuplets that we used to get. This is from last year. So, the square is rational. The square is measured. You can ration it out, but the circle is not. The circle has this transcendental number pi. So, when I first came into the crop circles, it was to do. I was training to be a Tai Chi teacher, and one of the big things to do with Tai Chi and to do with Chinese medicine and Chinese martial arts, when you go into the internal side, the inside of your own circle, and you start to look that way towards overcoming your own demons with martial arts, then they work upon a system where you're bringing heaven and earth together, which is what the squaring and the circle is all about, uniting heaven and earth, the material realm with the transcendental. So there we have an ancient system of medicine and doctrination which centers around these kinds of principles. And so I followed that. And Qigong, the practice that goes with Tai Chi, I taught it for several years at festivals, and I went around and got involved with various teachers, and I've been blessed to meet some really amazing people. And one of the things I've found with some of these amazing people is that when there's an exercise called pushing hands, when you sort of move into each other's space and you sort of flow with each other. And these guys, some of these Chinese guys, it feels like they're moving you magnetically. It feels different. And when you do the Qigong practice, after a while, you start to feel kind of magnetism. It feels different to muscular force or anything like that. So magnetism is something that seems to me to be prevalent in the coincidences people experience. It's like consciousness moves around. We think of energy, you see, as force. And we go to school and we learn physics, and it says force equals mass times acceleration. So, you know, when I push my car, I need the density of that car to push back against me, and I need to exert so many pounds of pressure and all of this kind of stuff. But it only works on very localized areas. We're 98% space. The universe is 98% space, and yet it functions. We're told it worked from a big bang, and this was forceful. But how does it function without a mechanism of force with 98% space? Because you try to push space, and it doesn't work. So magnetism is something that we found is present in the crop circles as a mechanism for making the wheat lay down, because we know there's more iron particles. I also suggest to you that some of the technology that we may be on the paradigm shift. You know, you push your mind out into ideas of what these things may be around. And I wrote about this recently, about consciousness and the technology of consciousness being connected to a form of magnetism. And this is why coincidences happen, why we get drawn to places overwhelmingly and so on. There's a form of magnetism within consciousness, I believe, that we call fate or coincidence or guides our life, but Chinese and some of these other people seem to find ways to harness this technology and use some of this technology in different ways, particularly with their own bodies and their own consciousness. Oh, excuse me. Infinity. You think of it as this thing that has no beginning and no end, this thing that goes on forever. But is it? But they're definitely, the crop circles have definitely been drawing this issue to our attention, and so we need to try and understand it. We know that modern physics doesn't use infinity. It doesn't use it in any of its equations. It has to leave, well, if you want to build things, if you want to build bridges or you want to send someone to the moon, maybe, then you use Newtonian physics. If you want to send someone across the solar system, supposedly we're supposed to know Einsteinian physics, and these things are all completely different. They don't work the same. So infinity then becomes a nonsense. You have to leave it out so that you can regulate your measurements and calculations. So, come back to this before I launch into the main body of my talk here. The circle represents two different dimensions, the inside and the outside. If you had a mouse running around the inside of that and one running around the outside, then they wouldn't meet. They'd be in two different worlds. And that's a metaphor for our individual personalities and our outside world. How we seek truth in the world is a relationship between our inside and our outside. So the circle actually is more than just a circle that contains a piece of space. They're seen as more than symbols, more as metaphors for who we are. Now the Mobius strip is something that's been appearing in crop circles, like the figure of 8 that we saw earlier. And what this does is it takes a circle and it folds it so that the outside and the inside become one. And you follow the path of the ants, and now two dimensions have joined together. The inside and the outside have weaved together. And this is again something we've been shown in crop circles many times. So I believe, again we've been pointed to that relationship that we have with ourselves and the outside world. There's a man, he's a psychologist. He wrote a book called The Ever-Present Origin. His name's Jean Gebser. And he talks about an evolution of consciousness separate from an evolution of biology. And he says that from the Renaissance, we began to appreciate space in a very big way. Three-dimensionality, obviously, we began to be able to represent it on two-dimensional surfaces. But he says that at the time that man consciously became aware of the space that was laid out in front of him, at the same time there was a corresponding realization that this space exists on the inside. But we're talking about space, and everything that's happened since the sort of Renaissance until now has pretty much focused on space. Our world is dominated in lots of ways by space. Not space up in the sky, space around us. And so, in 1905, we had Sigmund Freud, who started talking about fourth dimensionality in terms of dreams. And at the same time, Einstein started talking about fourth dimensionality and time and space linking together in terms of space. So there was a kind of correspondence, a coincidence of these two people starting at the same time to talk about what possibly the fourth dimension could be, and could it be related to dreams, or is it, does time and space link together, which is what Einstein kind of proved. And so, is this aspect of time in our lives, our everyday routines, how we organise our society with regards to time and so on, is this relevant? Do we have an outside clock that sort of dictates our schedules, but we have an inside clock that works in a different way, particularly if you play music or get involved in the arts, which is what I'm going to come on to. Picasso was actually trying to represent fourth dimensional. You didn't need to walk around the painting. You could get this fragmented image by seeing it up front. There were ways he was trying to express what he was feeling about the world that he was interacting with his consciousness as well. So my journey began, 97, with me reading a number of books, one of which was Carlos Castaneda's The Teachings of Don Juan. And this book had a quote which has stuck with me since then. It is energetically imperative for human beings to realize that their only thing that matters is their encounter with infinity. And regardless of the book and what it was, I mean, it catalysed a big journey for me. But that particular statement stayed with me, and I thought, okay, I'll keep that. The infinity part's a big part of the crop circles. Let's see what comes from it. So the main body of my area of research then, in interacting with the crop circles and coming to them and trying to make sense of the geometry, has been really about these things, and I've kept it into these areas, really. Consciousness itself, the use of psychedelic plants to affect consciousness by people from different cultures historically and from people today. Humanity. I suggest that most of the crop circles that have come down as they're symbols that have come through humans. They've been reflected in various different cultures. And so these are all things we've toyed with. I think that the human condition has been continually drawn to our attention. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. Creativity. I think this is the biggest single gift as human beings we're given above the animal species. I think that we overlook many miracles. We're overlooking them now with the way that we run our education systems and so on. And the creativity that we see in terms of the crop circles, the way that these simple numbers are recombined in a number of in myriad ways to just give us a new design, I awe at the creativity, that the fact that no crop circles are the same, but different themes are used and recreated and combined as a lesson in creativity. I found them amazing. Expression. As human beings, we live on stories. We listen to stories. People tell stories and they express themselves. People dance and express themselves. We are beings of expression. And I think this is, again, another thing that the crop circles have drawn to my attention and made me aware of how are we all doing with that right now. How are we all doing with the way we express ourselves in society, to each other, to ourselves, and so on. And art. Crop circles are art. What is art to us? Art and philosophy go together. They certainly did with the Greeks, together with cosmology. And so, is art the thing? I said, when I've written for the Spiral, I've said that I think, I agree with Terence McKenna when he said, the only way out of our present problems is to put the art pedal to the metal. There's nothing else really for it. We can go on bitching and moaning about the global warming or whatever else the latest crisis is, but it's ourselves and our own kind of souls in that respect. So he pushed for just go for art, go for creativity. And I've come to agree with a lot of that. So peyote was the first kind of psychedelic plant I encountered. I went out to Arizona and I spent some time in the Native American church and did it properly and, you know, focused and thought, okay, I'm going to approach this plant and see what it is. I'd read about it as best as I could and done the research, but you can only know when you take it and experience these things for yourselves. They make these bowls out on the reservations that out of beads. These are like coconut shells that are full of tiny, tiny little beads, and they make these designs. And you see these things, you know, sometimes in visions and so on. I talked about this a bit last time, and many people have asked me to bring this back into the talk. Mushrooms. I love mushrooms. There is a guru called Dr. Paul Stamets. If you haven't heard of him, check him out on the internet. What that guy doesn't know about mushrooms and how they run an ecosystem, how they sustain life on the planet, and how ancient civilizations interacted with mushrooms. Peyote is seen as a teacher. It's seen as an alien being, an entity, which teaches people the right way to live. And it does it by peeling away your layers. Carlos Santana gave an interview to Melvin Bragg on the South Bank show some years ago and said, you know, Melvin Bragg said, what's the influence of drugs on your, you know, your musical creativity? And he said, well, I lived in Mexico and we used to smoke weed and play the blues and blah, blah, blah. But he said, I took peyote once and this is not recreational. You know, he said, and 10 years later, I felt like, okay, I've peeled away some layers now. I know who I am now. And he said, and that was 10 years ago and it's still going on. It kind of stays with you, that the experience, not because it's so dramatic, because it can be not dramatic. It's the way you feel, like some people feel when they work with the I Ching. They feel that they're being guided by some unknown force. So this acceptance of something that you can't see in your world, but something that has some kind of physical representation, is something that's accepted across a lot of ancient cultures. The Mayans had clearly had a big relationship with psychedelic mushrooms. They carved all these little deities into them. The Catholics, when they came through, buried a lot of them. They've been found in recent archaeological digs, and you go around the world, you find that this is a 25,000-year-old cave painting from Algeria. There's mushrooms there. Definitely. This is, I was in India last year, and this is a copper plate thing from the Rig Veda, and that Shiva holding a mushroom. I haven't got a pointy thing. Have I got a pointy thing? Is this? Oh yeah, there we are. There's a mushroom there. This is Demeter and Persephone holding a mushroom. This is something I can't pronounce, Codex, from Mexico, from the ancient Aztec culture, and they've definitely got mushrooms there. So that our ancient ancestors had a relationship with mushrooms and saw them as beings that you could physically have a manifestation of, but there was a consciousness within these plants, is something that's well accepted amongst shamans. But it goes further than that. The mushrooms are actually amazing things. The spores themselves can exist in a vacuum. This means that they could have floated here from outer space, and very likely did, on a ball of rock, which then they attach themselves to, and it's been proven that by a chemical process they can break down and calcify the rock to begin to create humus, and then the catalyst of life begins. Once they start to break down dead tissues and create soil, then life can begin. Plants, animals, us. And so if you look at this chart, it shows that the evolution of our DNA, and one of the things you see is that one of the largest parts here is the fungi part, which means that most of our DNA is mushroom. They're inside us as well as outside of us, and partly we wouldn't live without it because they work in a fantastic way. They only work in symbiosis. They'll only do a deal with you if you can do a deal back with them and it's fair and balanced and mutual. There's no parasitism, there's no competition with mushrooms. They only do, work with... Most trees on the planet wouldn't grow unless the mushroom mycelium, the fine white hairs of which there's 8 miles in every square inch of soil around the planet, attaches itself to the seeds of trees and gives it nutrients in the early part of its life. The trees then grow and give back some light energy. They do a share. The mushroom mycelial mat, actually, if it's underneath a forest of different trees, will share nutrients between trees. Ones that need some, it will take some from there and give it to them and pass it back. And they act as these mediators, and they're everywhere. Everywhere. And it's my contention that they are the aliens, in a sense. They're on the inside of us and they're outside of us. They're certainly our ancestors. We wouldn't be here unless they were able to moderate the bacteria that's in our stomach. There's more bacterial cells in us than there are human cells in our stomach. They're moderated by fungi DNA to work. They pre-select bacteria that will work. 65 million years ago and 250 million years ago, when the Earth was hit by an asteroid, life finished. There was darkness. The only thing that mushrooms inherited the Earth, that was the only thing that was left over. And they then began the process again, and this has happened a couple of times. That's led to our evolution. So every time you take a step over the ground, the mushroom mycelia behind you reaches up and grabs for the dead tissue. It knows you're there. It's a conscious, sentient being, in my view, that's everywhere on the planet. There's more mass of it than any of the trees and any of the things you put together. We're right underneath our feet, as it were. So DNA is something that's been shown in crop circles. So we're talking about what's in our DNA. The largest part of it should probably be looked at, I think. Maybe. There's the good old mushroom mycelia. You see these things when you leave your pots out on the garden, and they're there. And they do their job, amazingly. They create about an inch of topsoil every 100 years, I think. So... This guy, Paul Stamets, has patented some processes where he's said that he can save the world with mushrooms. They laid out a patch of earth and they poured diesel and gas and oil and all sorts of stuff on top of it. And they cordoned off 4 parts of it, and they put chemicals on one, and they left one as a control, and they put some other bacteria on another one, and they put a load of mushroom spores on the last one, and covered them over and went back 8 weeks later. And this is what you found. on the mushroom pile. The others were still dirty and stinky, but these ones had cleaned up the soil. There was even insects that were starting to gather around, and birds were starting to come and drop seeds, and then within 3 months there was all this grass growing. There is a kingdom of 2 million mushrooms estimated, and we know something like 14,000 species. Our ignorance is completely exceeded by, you know, orders of magnitude compared to what's out there. We know nothing. The old growth forests, there's a garicon mushroom that is very... Paul Stamets, when the recent Gulf War was going on, they asked for solutions to mushrooms because they wanted to find out what would be effective against fighting against viruses and bacteria and various things that could be from biological warfare. He sent in the garicon mushroom, which, when you look at it under a microscope, looks exactly like the Venus Willendorf form. I don't have a picture of it here, but it looks exactly like the goddess. And this mushroom hit on the scale 20 points. Bang, 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 for all kinds of different HM1 viruses, all kinds of different things. The mushrooms are right there, and I think we're being ignored. They're being ignored. If you look at the magnified mycelium mat, that's the kind of structure you see. Mostly space. Yeah? And then you look at this one. This is our human brain, the neural network. And we see similar structures, the way that the neurons will kind of put together and so on. And this is an X-ray of a galaxy cluster. So it's, you know, as above, so below, as they say. Microcosm, macrocosm seems to be pretty evident. Very similar. And there we have a crop circle. I think this was 2002, 2003, I can't remember, in Eastfield. And we have the tree of knowledge, the tree of life, or tree of knowledge. And underneath it, we have a mushroom, showing that, you know, symbiosis, both species. We're clearly being shown, I think there, that this is relevant. And then, of course, this year I had lots of phone calls when this appeared, because when I first started talking about psychedelic mushrooms and the mushrooms of the aliens, everyone was saying, "You've lost it, Gary, you know. It's little green men, it's you know." And I was going, no, it's the mushroom, you know, it's really... And this appeared this year, so this to me is definitely a psychedelic mushroom, the Amanita muscaria in some ways, and it's got different representations. The crescent, in the Native American church, the peyote altar is a crescent. It always has been for thousands of years. So that's interesting. So this year we've had a plethora of animals and life forms, which have been a delight to me. The dragonfly was lovely, the veins inside that were just amazing, and the eyes. But these are things that have been through our DNA. They're on that scale. Again, we're talking about things that have passed through us humans. They're a part of us. Fish. And the number 7, spiritual transformation. 7 is the number of spirit. We're being thrown. 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. I'm particularly fond of that number. Jellyfish, 7 and 4. 4 representing the square. 7, the number of spirit, because it's the only number that you can't divide a circle rationally by. It's 51.51, it's the angle of Giza. 7 is the standalone virgin number. 7 and 4 working together there. The spiritualization of the earthly realm. So, I reiterate, consciousness, psychedelic plants, humanity, creativity, expression and art. Does anybody know this lady? Yeah? As a Tai Chi teacher and learning to play African drums as well, the whole left-right thing comes into play. And this lady, if you don't know her, she was an anatomist, a neuroanatomist at Harvard University. And at the age of 38, she had a stroke. And so she was quite pleased about it now because she was able to study herself from the inside while she was having the stroke. And she tells a wonderful story. It's very heart-rending. If any of you have ever heard of TED Talks on the internet, go on there, put her name in and watch her 15-minute talk. It will have you in tears. But basically, she shows that the left and right brain are completely different from each other. The left brain acts like a serial processor. It thinks about the past, it thinks about the future, it thinks about details, language. It's completely there. The right is a parallel processor. It thinks in images. it thinks about the now. And so as she was having this stroke and her left brain was closing down, she was experiencing nirvana. She was experiencing the now, and she didn't want to let it go. And she realized why. The two hemispheres are connected by a load of fibers, like 300 million of them or something. And women have more of them, which is probably why you can multitask. It's true, you can. But apart from that, they're completely separate entities. But we are challenged with the job of balancing it, of making those two things work together in a funny kind of way. Yin and yang. It has so many meanings. Creativity. This man, Sir Ken Robinson, he's on a mission at the moment to prove that education, the education system that we have today, is destroying creativity. And he makes a very good case for it. I urge you to watch his speech, but he gives some wonderful examples of how we're doing that. One of them is being afraid to make mistakes. We're taking young children and we're telling them that making mistakes is the worst thing you can ever do to them. So by the time they get to 15, they're going to tell you anything so that you don't think badly of them, that you don't think that they've done something wrong, that and we all kind of get indoctrinated. Well, what we know about creativity is that you've got to make loads of mistakes. You've got to go through this kind of painful process, and we're kind of destroying that. And so, what is the creative part of us that is necessary? How do we need to get this creative part out of ourselves? This woman is called Gillian Lynn. She, in the 1930s, she was one of those children in school that fidgeted and didn't pay attention very much. And so they took her to the doctors. And the doctor, listened to the story from the mother, and they said, oh, she doesn't pay attention, she's terrible. And she's sitting there on her hands, And the doctor comes over and says, I've listened to your mother, and, she's told me all about it. I'm going to go outside now and have a conversation with your mum and leave you on your own for a minute. Is that okay? So she, yes. Goes outside, and as he leaves, he puts the radio on. Shuts the door and looks through the window. Well, as soon as they leave the room, she's off the chair and she's dancing and singing. And so the doctor says, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with your daughter. Mrs. Lynn, I would suggest you take her to dance school. So she did. And recounting this story some years later, she says, it was amazing. It felt electric. She said, I was amongst people that had to move to think just like me. And now she's actually the woman that choreographed Cats and some of Andrew Lloyd Webber's most famous musicals. She's a millionaire and still works very prolifically today and teaches and inspires thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And I just can't help but wonder, had there been an available diagnosis of ADHD in the 1930s, would she have been put on Ritalin and told to calm down? And is her right brain the thing that we're dealing with here? And is we're all different, and how does this creativity get received in the world? And she's a positive example of that. We need to be careful, and what are we treading on? So, art and the concept of flow. One of these things about psychedelics or consciousness is about different states of consciousness. We know about anxiety, we know about stress and worry, and we know about bliss and happiness, and we go through this different range of emotions no matter how we try to structure and order our lives. They're there for us. But when an artist goes into flow, they experience something. This is a testimony of a composer. This was actually over like several pages, this testimony, but this is kind of a synopsis of it. And he says, you're in an ecstatic state to such a point that you feel as though you almost don't exist. What a way to feel. I have experienced this time and again. My hand seems devoid of myself, and I have nothing to do with what is happening. I just sit there watching it in a state of awe and wonderment. Awe and wonderment. And the music just flows out of itself. Awe and wonderment, this is something we don't educate anymore in the world. As I've gone through the process of realizing that sacred geometry is linked to music, and that this is linked to consciousness, and that the plants grow in five-fold geometry, I feel like I've gone through a process over 12 years where I've looked through the eyes of a child again, and I've not been told that this is all a mess, The universe was created by a bang, a crack, a pop and a whistle, which sounds more like a breakfast cereal, and there's nothing much to worry about. The more you go back in history, it's all boring, you know, and all I've watched is this wonderment and order unfold. And so going back to the original kind of slide, is it chaos to order? Is there order already here? Is heaven already here for us to discover? And do we have to clean our eyes and clean our consciousness and see in some ways and look at the world again with innocent perception? I wonder. This is another testimony from a poet. It's like opening a door that's floating in the middle of nowhere, and all you have to do is go and turn the handle and open it and let yourself sink into it. You can't particularly force yourself through it, you just have to float. If there's any gravitational pull, it's from the outside world trying to keep you back from the door. Ecstasy comes from the word ekstasis, which means to stand beside yourself. To stand beside yourself, to be in an altered state, to be in flow. We know that the nervous system can process something like 110 bits of information at once. Listening to my voice now, you're processing about 60. You can't listen to two people and understand them at once because it's just a slight overload on you. But you can, with one person, you've got a bit of processing power to be doing, you know, thinking about what you're going to have food afterwards or whatever. When you go into a state of flow, when people are experiencing what I just described, we know that that's overloaded and that they kind of go into this altered state there once they've overloaded this system because it's more than you can process in whatever state. As part of the research I had put before me by coincidences, I would say, this African drum, which sat in the corner of my room for a year, 97 to 98, and then in 98 I started to do something about it and started to try and learn some stuff. And then I met a man who's here today, Lou, who put me on the path of where to study this particular style of music. Manding rhythms, which is based on a language, and they're like bird calls, actually. When you hear the ensemble together and the soloist plays, it's like hearing a skylark out in the fields. And it's polyrhythmic music, not monorhythmic. And what is that? Monorhythmic music has the one beat, and we're all accustomed to it in the West, whereas polyrhythm plays around the one. It's like having a load of arrows. If you imagine a load of arrows on a square box, all kind of zigzagging their way across in different directions, and all just slightly missing each other. If you removed all the arrows, you would just see one aimlessly zigzagging around, and it wouldn't have any meaning. But when the other arrows are on there, and they're all going about their business, it makes sense, and it works. They just miss each other, they just glance off each other. And so, when you play this kind of music in an ensemble, your boundaries get dissolved. They start to move away because you're becoming you get a sense of individuality, that you're expressing yourself individually, but you're also a part of the whole, and you have consideration for all of those. And as a communal action, this is something we don't do anymore, and it very powerfully puts you together and binds you together. Often psychically and spookily, you know, someone will make a call, a particular call, and you'll be doing it at the same time because you're so tuned in together. But it's this feeling, it's this model for having the fact that you can be individual amongst it, but you also have consideration for everything else. This is a model for how these people play their music, not just as drums. Singing starts first, they play with other instruments, and it's done at ceremonies and punctuates every, you know, kind of important function in their lives. But importantly, it dissolves boundaries. And again, we're talking about peeling away layers of false identities that we may have accrued over our lives so that we can express ourselves more honestly. We can't express ourselves honestly with any false identities or false stuff. And so boundary dissolution from ourselves, how we realize, how we dissolve our boundaries in a right way that's safe for us, is an issue. North African dancers used to stay up all night and play their sacred music, and every now and again there would be that moment, you know, when I'm sure you've all seen it in some live performance, when someone steps through the porthole and they do something in front of you which is just fantastic. And everybody just, their heads turn and they have to watch. Well, when that used to happen in North Africa, that's when they clapped and they would shout, Allah, Allah, Allah. They would say, that's God there. This person has gone into a place where God is there. And this is interesting. Having something outside of you come to you for a while and then go away is not new. We look at ancient Greece and we look at the muse. The Romans had the geniuses. They called Socrates said that he had a daemon that gave him all his wisdom. They gave their artistic prowess or their skills away to a third party, to a mysterious unknown force, something that was alien, that came through them and inspired them and taught them and so on. This is rife throughout all of the ancient literature. Incidentally, when the Moors went through southern Spain, the Allah, Allah got changed to Ole, Ole for the bullfighting and the flamenco dancing. They incorporated it, so we still kind of, but the meaning for it, of what it meant, slightly obscured today. So this inspiration of the muse is not new. Something that's there, that can give an artist. There's a woman whose name escapes me at the moment. She wrote a book called Eat, Pray, Love. And she's 40 years of age. She's been a writer all her life. It's her passion. And it's funny, isn't it? When you think about the arts, right? If a child comes up to you and you say, what are you going to do when you grow up? And they say, I'm going to be an artist. You go, oh, better get yourself a trade, you know? Can be a bit dodgy, you know? You all end up as manic depressive alcoholics, mostly, you know? So there's not a good kind of encouragement to go in to be an artist, yeah? And then this woman, right? So she fights all that away and thinks, no, my passion is writing. I'm going to be a writer. And she sits down and she writes several books and then writes this book, Eat, Pray, Love, and it's a bestseller, worldwide bestseller. Now everybody talks to her as if she's doomed. Oh, every piece of your work now is going to be judged against that one. How are you going to cope? Will you end up an alcoholic, manic depressive? Because, and so we all have these kinds of reactions to people who, you know, go into the arts. It's really strange. And she talks about this muse. She says she shows up for work every day, and she sits down at her desk, and she starts to do the writing, which is her passion as a human being. And if the muse doesn't show up and give her a bestseller, then at least she showed up for work, and this one didn't. She deals with her the psychology of her artistic prowess, that it can come and go at random times, and it can be there and it not there, and it teaches you in different ways. Not to a schedule, not to a recording contract that says you must perform and there's the pressure. She puts it to, no, this is mysterious, this thing that comes through us. This is something that we interact with as human beings, and we can't give it any order. It's there, we've all touched it, and it's invisible. And it's not being heard at the moment or used in the way it used to. Perhaps it's manifesting in the fields to knock us on the head. So how does it feel to be in the flow? These are the sort of highlights of that. We feel completely involved in what we're doing, focused and concentrated. This is something we will aspire to, is it not? A sense of ecstasy, of being outside everyday reality, healthily as a human being. Greater inner clarity. We know what needs to be done and how well we're doing. We know that the activity is doable. In all the studies of flow, there's a guy called Cheminsky, a psychologist who studied flow for 40 years. This is his research. He says that apart from the exceptions, of which there are always the gifted ones, you need to put 10 years technical work into whatever it is you're going to do. If you're going to be a sculptor, you're going to be a musician, you're going to be a painter, you need to do the hard slog. You need to do 10 years. And it's after that that something can happen that is creative. And by that I mean the invention of a new idea which has value. Something which has value. And there we have that blank sheet of paper at the beginning. Where does an idea come from? Where does this creative impulse come from our blank sheet that's got value? If I think of, and I'm inspired to carve a particular piece of wood into a certain way, the dream has become reality. I have the ability as a human being to take something from that unknowable realm and make it square and make it real. And it's got this connection to the heavenly realm because it's come from there. On being an artist, Bruce Lee, who inspired me lots because of the philosophical writings he wrote, he said many great things. He said as a martial artist he was second, he was a human being first, and that martial arts to him was a tool to train his awareness, to train his body, to train his ego, so that he could know himself and therefore honestly express himself without lying. And that's very hard to do. It is a challenge for anybody, I would suggest, to honestly, passionately express yourself. It's very difficult to do. And so he would say, don't get set into one form, adapt it, build your own, let it grow. Be like water, my friend. This is such, I feel I've been touched so many times when I've walked into crop circles and felt that this energy that flows like water has created this wonderful art and then given me the deeper understanding of what this means in my life. Okay, 777. You all know that this crop circle appeared in front of me. And Paula Wynne. And it was the Om symbol, the universal symbol of creation. And various coincidences and things that had happened up to that night had kind of rubber-stamped mushroom research that I'd been doing and various other things to kind of give me a nod for myself. Yep, this is okay. And when the light flash happened at about 3:13, the whole sky flashed. We were sat there, and that reminded Win he needed to go and change the tapes over on the cameras, video recorders down in the car. So he went down, come back up, but while he was gone, a skylark, one of the beautiful singers, sat above us in the dark and sang this song. And if you hear these birds, they do sound like an African drum soloist when he's on form, and he's just perfect. And I just sat there with Paula, and we thought, you know, this is heavenly, this is wonderful, just listening to this chorus. In the dark was unusual. So it stopped as Wynne come back up, and I'd said to Paula, just as that had happened, I don't care if there's no crop circle down there, you know, that was enough. Heaven really is here. And I really meant it. There was a point in my own personal evolution when it really meant it to me. When I started my journey, I was actually quite sick. This has been a whole process for me personally, of being ill, being nearly 15 stone in yellow when I started, stressed out lawyer. What does life hold any value? I don't see any meaning to it, blah, blah, blah. It's just all the same stuff that we all go through. And I can honestly say that from my own personal journey, despite what anybody says about the crop circle phenomena, that for me, they've been the biggest healer, teacher, and continue to be so. And they've shown me that there's so much value to life that it's just amazing. Last year, I met this Indian Swamiji. He came over and asked me to tour him around the crop circles in my capacity as tour guide. I thought, yeah, okay, I'll take you. I didn't really know who he was. He did a couple of amazing things. We sat in the middle of the Barbary Castle pie. That's our pose as the Blues Brothers, spiritual. I'm advising him spiritually there, obviously. A couple of years before, he had some auspicious company. That's the president of India on the right, the Dalai Lama, I'm sure you all know, and a man called Dorian from Dorian Airlines. It was then I realised, oh, this guy's, he's big, is he? What does he do? Perhaps I should check him out. He seems to command big respect. So I went to India under his invitation and spent 3 months in his ashram. And he took me on stage and fulfilled my dream to look like Kung Fu, the man David Carradine, when I was 5. That's one chalked off. There was like 10,000 people in the audience. It was this big festival of Navaratri, this festival of the goddess. He's the only guru that deals with the Sri Yantra, representing the 9 goddesses, and he spends 9 days perambulating around this deity and honouring the goddess and so on and so on. He pulls me on stage, shows everybody a picture of the goddess, tells them all that God is speaking in the fields. The goddess is there, you know, it's happening. He's been there. It was an amazing experience. He gave me these orange robes. I didn't know what they meant, actually. He gave me some beads as well. And a month or 6 weeks later, there was a special festival going on in the ashram, so I thought, I'll don me new tweeds, you know. So I put my orange robes on, and some guy came up to me and said, are you a sannyasin? So I was like, I don't know what that means. And he said, oh, where did you get the robes? So I said, Swamiji gave them to me, and he said, he's honoured you as an artist. He's honoured you as someone who has a freedom of consciousness that strives for perfection in the best way you can, which I thought was a dream come true in lots of ways. And when I talked to him, I said, what do you think of the crop circles? he said he felt that they were weaved from love. So the two things I've picked up on my little journey so far is that we have to learn discernment. These are the two things. This is the first of the two things. We have to be discerning, and that means we have to accept that we need to reconsider our convictions at any moment. We have to learn by our own experiences and make loads and loads and loads of mistakes and not beat ourselves up for those mistakes, because that's what we need to do. Humility comes hand in hand with discernment. As we accept that we've been wrong, as we accept that we've made mistakes, as we accept that we've made errors, there are only errors on our path on the way. And it seems to me that if we reinvigorate the education system in a way that takes children and starts to show them the wonder and the awe, and it also teaches them, you know, don't do this, don't do that, but starts to teach them to make decisions for themselves and gives them discernment and these things for themselves. These are simple tools that would open the door for creativity. There's a wonderful story about a little girl who was sitting there drawing a picture in the class. At the back of the class, she's always running around and fidgeting, but she's sitting drawing quietly, and the teacher goes over and she's drawing this picture, and she says, oh, that's very nice, what are you drawing? And the little girl says, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher says, well, nobody knows what God looks like. And the little girl says, well, they will in a minute. Innocent perception. Indivisibility and divisibility. We talk about, where does material reality come from? Is it chaos? Is it the nothingness, the no-thingness? What is no-thing? Indivisibility and divisibility. I have a sideways Vesica piscis shaped instrument that I've been talking at you with for the last hour or so. And in a way, the indivisibility and divisibility are being played out right now. And the law of mutuality is also being played out right now. Because I'm taking the words from this indivisible place and I'm dividing them into words so that you can have them as units and meaning of understanding. And if there was no basis for you to in your life, something that would affect or impact your life, then basically what I would be saying would be blah, 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 as it might be for some people. Is it? Okay, I'm going to finish now. I've got two more slides. And so indivisibility, okay, I'm finishing now. Okay. You're outvoted. Okay, so infinity, I think it is a quality, not a quantity. It transcends limitation because it's a quality, not a quantity. In its point of residence is the human heart. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond all measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Nelson Mandela said that when he was released, and I think that picture with innocent perception sums up what magic we have with us. Thank you all for listening.